This morning, our scriptural text is Genesis chapter 1. It's a text with which we are overly familiar, and it is difficult to engage the text anew, to engage in the mythopoetic meaning that it holds for us because of that familiarity. So today, I want to read the text in an experimental way from our current context, and with the ecological understanding of contemporary science and the environmental humanities interpenetrating with philosophical and theological sources, to see what we can construct between the ancient sacred texts and our contemporary lived context. And we'll undertake this experiment with photographs and poetry, soundscapes and science, philosophy and theology, mixing in creative and creating combination. The object is not to explain as much as to experience the origin story and to feel our way into the story along the edges of our own precarious existence. So we began. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep. This language of that first sentence of the origin story contains this evocative phrase, the tohu vabohu. It is the Hebrew phrase used to describe the circumstances out of which creation flowed forth, formlessness and void, or as Everett Fox calls it, wild and waste. We usually hear these words of the origin story and hold the tohu vabohu as a mythic chaos somewhere in the recesses of deep time. But consider what we know and what we don't know about our place in the universe at the edge of the 21st century. Roughly 68% of the universe is dark energy, which we only know by its effects on the universe's expansion, and otherwise is a complete mystery to us. 68% of the universe. Another 27% of the universe is comprised of dark matter, which we know more about based on what it is not, rather than what it is. The rest, everything else that we observe, everything on Earth and other planets and stars, adds up to less than 5% of the universe. Everything else, tohu vabohu, formlessness and void, wild and waste. While a wind from God swept over the face of the waters, the ruah, the wind, the breeze, the gale. The ruach is also spirit, but in the Hebrew Bible, It never refers to spirit in the sense of a separate divine entity. It often describes that which fills a person, ideas and attitudes, the ruach of God over the face of the wild and waste at the beginning, filling us too as a wind, a breeze, a gale. But to be clear, Amy Jo Levine and Mark Brettler say of this Hebrew word, the ruach suggests something chaotic as opposed to ordered. The breath, the wind, the spirit of God's creativity hovering over the face of the tohu vabohu is chaotic. When times feel chaotic, a search for order out of a chaos, a need to place order as having been established from the beginning, and a promise of return to a sense of order becomes a palpable necessity. Remember this, wild and waste. It will return in unanticipated ways. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness God called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. The first ever image of a black hole, taken just a couple of years ago, was described by one scientist as seeing what we thought was unseeable. This photo is of one of the largest known supermassive black holes, located at the center of their gargantuan elliptical galaxy, Messier 87, 53 million light years away. That's 318 quintillion miles away from where we sit right now. And this black hole alone contains 6.5 billion solar masses. One solar mass is the equivalent to our sun's mass. This black hole contains 6.5 billion of those solar masses, unfathomable in size, beyond comprehension. And God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. God called the dome sky, and there was evening, and there was morning, the second day. It's hard to read this origin story the way its original hearers would have heard it and told it. The Genesis 1 creation story is a type of trauma literature, a story that was forged in crisis. It was composed in exile when the Hebrew people were taken into Babylonian captivity. The priestly writer of Genesis 1 spun this origin story somewhere between 587 and 500 BCE, in a time when Israel was reconstructing its life and beliefs, when very little seemed solid or stable. Humanity in slavery, in exile, dominated, creates a story of creation. Connection, order, stability, stand against exile, chaos, precarity. What is good to believe in a time of traumatic upheaval and destruction? This is, in a different way, our question too. Our own time of climate collapse and ecological destruction of skies above and the waters below. What would it mean if we read the Genesis creation story with an empathic nearness to climate refugees, to place in the center of the reading those who first and most adversely are affected by the ever-increasing climate crisis. To hear the words as crisis literature once again, what would it sound like then? And God said, let the waters under the sky be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together, God called seas. And God saw that it was good. An ecotone emerges, a region of transitional biologies, ecological communities meeting and merging into a place where two habitats bring forth richer species than possible in either habitat alone, an intraactive space of becoming. Then God said, let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seeds and fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with seed in it. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seeds of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed in it. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. I want to be sure that you heard verse 24. It is the earth that brings forth the living creatures, entering into interactivity with the creativity of God. Have you ever noticed that before? The earth brought forth the plants and the trees. The earth, very early in the creation story, comes to act creatively, becoming a creative source of divine activity, bringing forth life and sustaining it. And God said, let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night. Let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years, and let them be lights in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth. And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night and the stars. God set them in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fourth day. I wonder what comfort it might have been to the Hebrew people in Babylonian captivity, in exile far, far from home, to look into the skies in order to remember. Memory has long been an act of grief and mourning, but memory is also an act of resistance to violence and oppression, to a people in exile or to ones living amid devastation. Remembering can become a way of committing ourselves to putting something back together again when the fabric of relationality is rent by acts of violence and destruction. Reassembling, reconstructing, reconstituting, putting the dead back together in relationship with the living. Practices of relational remembering, not just reflective memory, can span spatiality and materiality and temporality to begin the work of resisting the power of violence by refusing to let go of those who are vital and sacred members of our lives, of human and more than human community, of the fabric of the cosmos. How did the more than human world surrounding them in Babylonian captivity become sources of sustenance amid crisis and sources of memory in the midst of trauma? How did the cosmic bodies connect them to their ancestors who stared up at the same moon and those same stars and felt grounded upon the earth? Remember, by Joy Harjo. Remember the sky that you were born under. Know each of the stars' stories. Remember the moon. Know who she is. Remember the sun's birth at dawn, that it is the strongest point of time. Remember sundown and the giving away to night. Remember your birth, how your mother struggled to give you form and breath. You are evidence of her life and her mother's and hers. Remember your father. He is your life also. Remember the earth, whose skin you are. Red earth, black earth, yellow earth, white earth, brown earth. We are earth. Remember the plants, trees, animal life, who all have their tribes, their families, their histories too. Talk to them, listen to them. They are alive poems. Remember the wind, remember her voice. She knows the origin of this universe. Remember, you are all people, and all people are you. Remember, you are this universe, and this universe is you. Remember, all is in motion, is growing, is you. Remember, language comes from this. Remember, the dance language is, that life is. Remember. And God said, let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth across the dome of the sky. So God created great sea monsters and every living creature that moves of every kind, with which the waters swarm, and every winged bird of every kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let birds multiply on earth. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures of every kind, cattle and creeping things, and wild animals of the earth of every kind. And it was so. God made the wild animals of the earth of every kind, and the cattle of every kind, and everything that creeps upon the ground of every kind. And God saw that it was good. What would it mean to read this as the origin story of every wild animal of the earth? Do we have the ability, or even the right, to empathize with those more than human beings now lost to the planet's entangled community of being and becoming? Can the origin story become crisis literature to draw forth our ecological grief, our climate grief, our animal grief? Whose story gets told in the Genesis origin story? How do we read the mythopoetic story anew from within the encroaching Earmocene of E.O. Wilson, the age of loneliness, as humans eradicate our ecological community? Lost by David Wagner. Stand still. The trees ahead and the bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here, and you must treat it as a powerful stranger, must ask permission to know it and be known. The forest breathes. Listen. It answers. I have made this place around you. If you leave it, you may come back again, saying, here. No two trees are the same to raven. No two branches are the same to wren. If what a tree or a bush does is lost on you, you are surely lost. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you. Then God said, let us make humankind in our image. Let us make humankind in our image according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the seas, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created humankind in God's image, the imago Dei, in the image of God. They were created, male and female, God created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. God said, see, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw everything that God had made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. This image of God, the imago Dei, in which humans are said to have been made, has been trouble for us for a long time. I wonder what you make of it today, if you even ever think about it? Is it the reason we believe we are special, exceptional, superior, at the top of the great chain of being? An image of the Imago Dei as reflective has certainly suggested that to us. But what if we thought about the image of God as refractive instead? Adam Pryor suggests that if we were to make this shift, we might see the Imago Dei not as a boundary that the creative power of the divine bounces off. Instead, it is a medium through which we work. The work of the continuing creative power of the divine passes through and is bent. And in being bent, seemingly invisible features of that creative power are dispersed and available in new ways. So when we read the origin story again, we need to ask, can there be a human being without the larger web of life in which we are entangled? Can we even conceive of a creative divine presence in the world without God's entanglement with the earth that participates in creative intraactivity? What would it mean if we shift our relational language from thinking about how we interact with the non-human parts of our planet to considering how we are interactive, mutually constitutive, entangled in relationships with the more than human web of life? The Genesis origin story was told amid the chaotic and disorienting trauma of exile by a people drawing sustenance from narrating their entanglement with the whole of the planet and divine creativity at play within it. We are situated within another period of chaos and disorientation, in which we are asking new questions about ourselves as humans, our relation to the more than human, our refractive potential for making available creative features of the divine, and even whether and how survival is possible. What are the fragments that we need to make sense of our relationship on a planetary scale in our current time of climate crisis and ecological disorientation? Whose experiences need to be prioritized in how that story is told? What forms of planetary relationships need to be narrated in new ways, not just with better scientific understanding of the environment, but with completely different ways of talking about and imagining what that relationality is and means? What fragments will we piece together to create that new story of creation?
Our sermon hymn today, Blue Boat Home.
And the earth